But yeah, I think the takeaway here is not that the White House has been influenced. The takeaway here is that the White House and Trump world generally have always been opposed to this war, and it's taking Zelensky some time to get on board with that.
Welcome to Real Clear Politics for Monday, March 24th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by RCP President and co-founder Tom Bevan and White House correspondent Phil Wegmann. So, gentlemen, Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are teaming up to bring the progressive message to voters across the country. It's called the Fighting Oligarchy Tour, Tom. What do you make of the tour, and what do you make of this matchup?
Well, listen. The Democrats are in a tough spot. And if you read about this tour and you listen to any of the clips or you saw, this is what, Bernie and AOC are trying to harness this energy, this anger that's out there. But the question is, what exactly do people want them to do? Right? What more can they be doing? And there it gets kind of vague. I mean, some of the quotes from people in the articles that were interviewed say, we want them to, stand up and fight. We want them to take matters into their own hands. We want them to be, well, what exactly does that mean? I mean, short of, committing political violence or something. I mean, what exactly do Democrats want? They have this dread that Trump is this existential threat, and that Democrats are somehow, they've been conditioned to feel that Trump is this existential threat to the country, and if they don't stop him somehow, some way, that they're gonna, lose the country, and there'll never be elections again, and all of these things that, frankly, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris told them during the campaign that would happen if they didn't get elected, and they didn't get elected. And so, look, there is energy out there, and that's what they're trying to do. But I'm not exactly sure. And you know what? To Bernie Sanders' credit, I mean, he talked about this on the stump too, because it's pretty obvious that Democrats, when you talk about oligarchs, I think AOC's had her picture taken with Alex Soros, George Soros' son, and there are plenty of billionaires on the Democratic side who are big-time donors and funders. And Bernie mentioned that. AOC kind of just sort of elides over it, doesn't really address it in a significant way, but there are contradictions there, and really there's just this swirling anger that's out there that they're trying to sort of harness and I think move in a positive direction for the party, but so far it hasn't really been working.
Well, Phil, what about AOC's future? I mean, Bernie Sanders has said he's not going to run for president, but AOC certainly could, and there might be a Senate run in her future as well.
She's coming of age. She's either turning 35 soon or already has. I'm not sure when the representative's birthday is, but it's clear that the energy is with her, and that Bernie Sanders is doing something that Joe Biden never could, trying to pass the torch here. Clearly, the progressive populist anger is directed at Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, because there's one lever that was available to them, and it was a shutdown over the continuing resolution. You saw Nancy Pelosi and some others snipe at Schumer for refusing to shut down the government, for refusing to put Republicans in a more difficult position, saying that he didn't get anything for it. So it's tempting to look at this as just sort of a airing of grievances. And certainly we've seen that on the Republican side as well in years past. But I think that there is something significant going on here beyond just the fact that they're complaining about oligarchy, beyond some of the hypocrisy. I mean, certainly Democrats, as Tom pointed out, had no problem with the big money machine. And according to a Forbes analysis before the 2024 election, I think there were 85 billionaires supporting Democrats, as opposed to about half that for Donald Trump. But their argument right now about big versus little and how Democrats are standing with the working class, that argument didn't work on the campaign trail, but they're renewing it now because they're trying to claw back those voters. And this is something that Republicans need to be on guard for, because yes, Donald Trump won over a lot of working class voters, but a lot of them were low propensity voters. Trump brought them into the fold. And so as we're asking what is the future of AOC, we also need to be keeping in mind this fact that Donald Trump is going to be exiting at some point. He's never going to be on the ballot again. He's going to be fighting for Republicans during these midterms, but they're going to have to find a answer where they can make those low propensity voters that John McLaughlin, Trump's pollster, told me the Republicans were renting. He said there's got to be a way to make them permanent. And you could certainly see that this Fight the Oligarchy tour would have a lot more purchase, perhaps, if the economy was doing worse, if Republicans were confronted with a recession. So this is something I think to watch for the future, even though, yeah, I mean, it's not clear what they want, and Democrats certainly seem on the back foot.
Well, Tom, what about AOC's political future? Because a lot of Republicans are sort of looking forward to her running or getting the Democratic nomination. Should they be hoping for that?
I think Republicans do need to be careful what they wish for. So the New York Times ran a big piece on AOC and said, "Oh, everybody's waiting for her to make her decisions. The party's hers, basically." They interviewed 20 progressives, members of the party, and they were all basically sort of waiting with bated breath that Bernie isn't going to run, and she is the heir apparent if she decides that she wants to do it. And I posted this to X, and immediately I got a bunch of responses from Republicans like, "Oh, that's great. Democrats will be out of power forever and Republicans." And there is something to that. I mean, again, for a party that finds itself in crisis, to and is looking to win over sort of the middle again and win back some of these working class voters, you wouldn't think that the proper response would be to elect or nominate the sort of furthest left congressperson from New York that you can find. However, that being said, we did just see an election where you saw 40+% of Democrats showed that they would vote for basically anybody, anything with a pulse, right? Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, didn't matter. And then you look at AOC's positives. I mean, she's young, she's charismatic, she's energetic, she's very good on social media. And yeah, I don't know that Republicans should just dismiss her out of hand as being just a certain loser against any Republican that's going to be up there. So she does have some political talent. You may think she's not smart, you may disagree with her positions, you may whatever, but she is popular. She does have a following. And again, for all the Democrats that are out of power and just dying to get back into power, she's as good of a vessel as any at the moment, I think, for Democrats.
Yeah. Well, Phil, is there any evidence that AOC is playing a longer game here and or could she make a kind of pivot the way a certain California governor has made to become...
You're going to start a podcast? Is that the pivot?
Well, I encourage anyone to start a podcast. It's so much fun. And it's great to be back, by the way. But is it, is that a path for her? And would she have to do that? B, can she do that? Is that this kind of pivot she could make?
It's notable that Bernie Sanders and AOC went west. They didn't stay in New England. Instead, if you look at the map, she was in Colorado, in Nevada, and in Arizona.
Tempe.
There were two swing states there. She hasn't quite yet parachuted into deep red America. I'm holding my breath for her to make a trip to Iowa. But yeah, it's certainly possible that AOC is setting the stage for this sort of thing. She's known very well by the base. She has proven to be a small dollar machine, much like Bernie Sanders. And if you look at the energy in the Democratic Party currently, the Green New Deal, the legislation for the Green New Deal as standalone didn't make it in, but it was, the basis for a lot of the infrastructure law. So she's built relationships, and she has the energy, and we could be discussing, AOC as a Senate candidate or as a presidential candidate very soon.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Senate, Tom, go ahead.
I want to add one of the interesting things about about this tour is, so, John Carl interviewed Bernie Sanders, right, on This Week, and was asking him, I think they were in Nevada, maybe, and was asking him, about the tour and all that. And then he said, well, is there anything Trump's done right? And Bernie Sanders said, well, sure, he's cracked down on fentanyl, and he's strengthened our borders. And he said, look, nobody thinks illegal immigration is a good thing. And my jaw dropped at that, and it took me about 2 seconds to do the Google and find a picture of Bernie Sanders raising his hand on the debate stage, along with every other Democrat on that stage except for one, which is Michael Bennet, the senator from Colorado. This is in June 27th of 2019, when they were asked by one of the moderators, would you legalize border crossings, decriminalize border crossings? And they all raised their hand, including Bernie Sanders. And he then went on to say immediately after that his healthcare plan would actually cover people who are in the country illegally. And, there were clip after clip after clip of Bernie Sanders, trashing the wall, saying that he would end deportations, all these things. So the fact that Bernie Sanders, who's about as far left as you can get, is trying to revise history here, and particularly on the issue of immigration, I think is instructive. And AOC, I think if she wants to be the nominee for the party, she is going to have to also find herself some areas where she can moderate her positions and or try and rewrite history, and or gaslight folks in to change her positions. Kamala Harris had trouble doing that. That was a problem for her during the campaign. And so for anybody who's out there on the left who's going to try and run for president, I think that's going to be an issue. And the internet is, it's forever.
Bernie Sanders on the question of immigration used to be sort of more protectionist. He was within a more conservative mindset when he was talking about how illegal immigration lowers wages. So this could be seen as a return to form for him. Obviously, there's hypocrisy there. But to Tom's point, the internet is forever. And AOC, not only did she go to the border to protest Trump's policies, she turned it into a photo shoot where she was in tears in front of a border detention facility. So if she's going to have to moderate,
I thought it was the parking lot.
Well, the internet knows the answer to that question, but it's going to be much more difficult for her. Whereas for Sanders, it seems like he was pushed even further left as a result of circumstance. And AOC, she came to age within the left.
Yeah. Okay. Well, guys, we're going to have to take a quick break. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Phil Wegmann. Don't go away. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Phil Wegmann. And gentlemen, Ukrainian President Zelensky, he was interviewed by Time Magazine. It was the cover story. The headline was The End Game. And he talked about his White House meeting with Trump. Here's just a part of what the article said. The writer says, as Trump has pushed to the end of the war, he seems to have reserved all the carrots for Russia while the Ukrainians get the stick. The image makes Zelensky smile and weigh his words. Quote, if the carrot is poison, then thank God, he says. Maybe that's the sneakiness of this diplomacy. So, Phil, what do you make of the article, and what's the status of the peace process right now?
I've lost track of how many magazine covers Ukrainian President Zelensky has been on. I think the informative quote from that piece is where Zelensky says that he believes that some in the White House team have been informed by Russian propaganda. That's a sentiment that he has expressed previously. There wasn't a lot new that was there, but this was a prickly Ukrainian leader at a moment when the White House says that the minerals deal is imminent. And this is a Ukrainian leader who's very skeptical of this administration. I think that his thought here is that Trump and company have come under the sway of Russia, where if you look at what Trump has said from the very beginning of that conflict, even as Steve Witkoff and others seem to be more understanding of Putin. I mean, you saw, Witkoff say that he trusted the Russian president over the weekend. But yeah, I think the takeaway here is not that the White House has been influenced. The takeaway here is that the White House and Trump world generally have always been opposed to this war, and it's taking Zelensky some time to get on board with that.
The piece there wasn't a lot new in this. I was kind of expecting a little bit more from this article. So I think it was a little bit disappointing in that regard. But there was this interesting anecdote about Zelensky being in the Oval Office, and he had brought the championship belt from his friend Alexander Usyk, who holds the heavyweight boxing title, and he had it sitting on the end table next to him, just to his right, and he was going to give it to Trump. And you know how Trump loves that kind of stuff, right? So it was in many ways the perfect gift. And instead of reaching for that, he reached for this file of all of these folks who Zelensky showed. And I remember watching him show Trump these photo after photo after photo of these soldiers who'd been, kids who'd been kidnapped, soldiers who'd been killed and taken away. And I guess the article sort of says that might have been a turning point in the meeting where Trump got defensive and felt like, he was being almost blamed for this. And the meeting could have gone a different way. And then at the end of the article, there's a great kicker reference that in all the commotion of that meeting and the way that it ended, that Zelensky got up and left the belt there, and they didn't even know what had happened to it, because remember, they got kicked out of the White House. And so it turns out that they did leave the belt, and somebody from the Trump administration picked it up, and now Trump has it sitting in his, somewhere where he has a bunch of similar type gifts. So that was sort of an interesting anecdote. But overall, I mean, Phil's right. Probably the most important thing was that Zelensky believes that the White House believes what Vladimir Putin says. And when Vladimir Putin says that, he had, thousands of soldiers that were surrounding Ukrainians in Kursk, and this was reported, and Zelensky said that wasn't true. But Putin told the White House that, the White House believed it, and that's kind of how the narrative has gone. I don't know what the status. They talked a little bit about the negotiations that took place in Saudi Arabia between Witkoff and Rubio and Walz and the team. I don't know exactly where things stand now, but this is a very delicate, long process with a bunch of parties that don't, they don't trust each other, and it's going to be very, very difficult to get them to the table and agree on things and then make those things stick.
Yeah. Well, speaking of parties that don't agree on much, Sunday night, Conan O'Brien was at the Kennedy Center. He won the Mark Twain Prize for American humor. It's an annual Kennedy Center event. This one featured Adam Sandler, Stephen Colbert, Tracy Morgan, John Mulaney, among others. And it was also, in the words of David Letterman, who was in attendance, and this is the quote, he called it the most entertaining gathering of the resistance ever. So, Tom, what did you make of the event, and does it sort of lend some credence to this idea that, things at the Kennedy Center were politicized long before Trump got involved?
Oh, I think that's clearly true. And, this is a continuing theme, and I'm going to talk to Richard Porter a little bit more a little later in the program about, the issue with BigLaw and law firms. And we have a piece on the site this morning talking from Stephen Collinson at CNN, basically saying, look, Trump his attacks are all encompassing across all of elite culture, whether it's universities, law, we have the Kennedy Center, you name it. And I think the Kennedy Center is a perfect example of what Trump wants to do there is just to restore some balance to the programming, as if that's somehow a bad thing, that there might actually be, we could depoliticize the programming at the Kennedy Center, and it doesn't always have to be like the wokest, craziest leftist stuff around, and a meeting of the resistance, as you point out, Andy. It doesn't have to necessarily be like that. I thought Conan was interesting in that, he had just hosted the Oscars, and I thought he did a pretty good job of sort of de-escalating and depoliticizing that, which had been, hosted by Jimmy Kimmel and had been very, very political for a number of years. And so Conan was an interesting choice, and I'm a huge fan of his, and I think he's really funny and has been for a very long time. So,
Well, Phil, he talked about Mark Twain a little bit and said that Mark Twain hated bullies. The implication being that there was a bully in the White House. What'd you make of the event? And again, to the point of, you know, politics and humor go together hand in hand. I don't think anyone could take them apart. But this, again, was sort of a meeting of the resistance as much as it was anything else.
My favorite part of the coverage was in the Associated Press write-up of the evening, and it noted that Sarah Silverman made remarks that were too vulgar to print, which made me wonder if the White House Correspondents Association is going to be inviting her to be the comedian next dinner. You know, Los Angeles and New York comedians liberal story at 11. I mean, until conservatives have funnier comedians, I think that there is going to be a frustration. But look, how did Trump win this last election? One of the things that he did is he was going on these podcasts. Joe Rogan is a comedian. He's not exactly the most top shelf comedian there is. I thought his recent special was pretty funny. He talked to the Nelk Boys, who are a bunch of pranksters. This idea that he's coming for comedians that was expressed by some of them seems ridiculous. If anything, Donald Trump ought to be their favorite target because he's very thin-skinned. He reacts to just about everything, and that gives even more attention to the bit itself.
Yeah. Well, a little bit of sad news, and that's that Utah Representative Mia Love has died at the age of 49. She was the first Black U.S. Republican Congresswoman. She served 2 terms in the House, and she wrote this moving goodbye, which was published in the Deseret News. She wrote in part, quote, "The America I know is great, not because government made it great, but because ordinary citizens like me, like my parents, and like you are given the opportunity every day to do extraordinary things. This is the America I know." So, Tom, any thoughts on the passing of Mia Love?
really sad story. I mean, it's, 49 years old. I mean, it's so young, so
Right.
young.
And brain cancer, I should
It was
say.
brain cancer, and it wasn't something that I didn't know about it. It was kind of kept private, and then her daughter posted something on X a few weeks ago, basically making it public that she had been battling brain cancer, and they'd reached the point where the treatment was no longer being effective, and so they were basically just sort of at the end of life, and she was just trying to enjoy her time, with her family. And she did publish that article. We did run it on Real Clear Politics. It was very moving. And, she was daughter of Haitian immigrants, first African American Republican elected to Congress. I mean, she was a real trailblazer in that sense, and was very well liked, I think, in Congress and across the aisle. And so, she lived a short but great life. And again, it's a sad story, and we're sad to see her go.
Yeah. Phil, any thoughts?
Few of us know when our end is going to be imminent, and I thought it was courageous and also an act of service for her to spend some of her final moments in service of the country, providing that exhortation to everyone to continue the experiment in self-government and to not wallow in self-pity. This is a tragedy that she was taken so young, and you could see how someone who was weaker would do that sort of thing. Instead, she looked beyond her circumstances, and I think reflected on worthwhile principles.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. Our condolences, of course, go out to her family and friends in Utah. Don't go away. We'll be back with more Real Clear Politics right after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. Joined now by Richard Porter. He's a contributor to Real Clear Politics, a former committeeman from the state of Illinois. Richard, good to have you. Always good.
Good to be here, Tom.
So, Richard, you wrote a piece about BigLaw, and BigLaw has been in the news quite a bit lately. Lay the groundwork here. What is BigLaw, and why has Donald Trump decided that they are an institution that he wants to tangle with?
Well, BigLaw is a reference to the very large law firms that service corporate America and Wall Street. And There's probably 100 really significant law firms, and this is kind of a moniker that's given to those law firms that really specialize on big business deals, big business litigation, and the law firms have grown to be like the people that they've been servicing, and so they're quite large and international in scope, and really I think represent the elite element of law. And I think to understand what's going on, you have to look at the very first piece you posted this morning, Tom, which talks about how Trump has launched a war in all elements of elite culture. And so I think that what the Trump administration perceives is that the big law firms are kind of part and parcel, almost like the hub of what's been happening in terms of the politicization of business and law generally. And so I think that this is an extraordinary move designed to try to drive politics out of business. And by trying to get out of business, they're going after the law firms that service them.
We ran a post the other day by this guy, Jeff Clark, who it was on X. We ran it on, I think, over the weekend on the front page. And he talked about his experience in big law and how essentially, the left sort of captured all of these elite law schools. And then those folks moved on to sort of capture a lot of these law firms. And he mentioned that, there used to be some semblance of balance. There used to be kind of not necessarily 50-50, but over the past few decades, I guess, that's moved. So it's almost, 80-20, 90-10, leaning to the left. And the left is always championing when they're doing pro bono work. They're championing all the sort of left-wing progressive causes. And that what needs to happen is sort of some semblance of a return to balance, hiring of conservative, from conservative law schools or people who are conservative. Is that essentially how your experience has been in the field of law for the last 4 decades?
Well, I was very fortunate to be at a firm that was very welcoming of different points of view. And I don't know that all law firms had that same culture that ours did. In fact, I played an important role in the management and decisions about what kind of cases we would take on. So, I think you can't really, paint with a broad brush. That said, I think the real target of the Trump administration are the businesses that sort of joined hands with the activists. So it used to be that business was a counterbalance to government. But about 15 years ago, the Business Roundtable and other businesses like BlackRock, they all kind of threw in with the activists and sort of joined hands with them. And so suddenly there was no longer counterbalancing force within the ecosystem in which the big law firms operated. So if all the flow is coming from one direction, if it's all coming from the left, it's natural to go with the flow. And so I think that's what happened. Is what big law did was sort of mirroring what was happening in business more generally when business became more political. And so it became kind of a self-reinforcing phenomena where their lawyers sort of became the amen choir for some of what was going on. And you saw this politicization where, I was a Soviet history major in college, and one of the earmarks of the Soviet industrial model was to have political commissars in every business. And that's essentially what we started to adopt over the last 10 years, where people had these essential politicos brought into the C-suite under the rubric of DEI or ESG, and they became kind of the point of the spear within business for the left and for the Democratic Party. And so big business has become part of the Democratic coalition. And so I think what this is really aimed at is less the law firms, but more at depoliticizing business. And they're going after, an element of that ecosystem, which is going to help drive it back the other direction.
We're speaking with Richard Porter. He's a contributor to RealClearPolitics, has a piece on the site this morning about the very subject that we are discussing. He's a former RNC committeeman from the state of Illinois. Richard, obviously this was targeted. Paul Weiss is the name of the firm that's been in the news quite a bit. And so give our listeners a sense of what did the Trump administration, ask of them or demand of them? What was, and because I see these stories that, they capitulated to Trump and they've caved and all these things. Help us figure out exactly what was demanded or asked of them and what did they actually agree to?
Well, I think Trump ultimately demanded for them to be themselves. And I think that's what made this kind of an interesting agreement, because if you look at what the CEO of Paul Weiss agreed to, he was basically agreeing to the principles that guide the business of Paul Weiss in the first instance, to be balanced, and to hire from all ranges, a diverse array of legal talent, and to take on matters from all parts of the spectrum. In other words, Paul Weiss was never designed or intended to be one way or the other, as with other big law firms. And instead, what happened was there was this drift. And so basically, as with Columbia, you look at the agreement that the Trump administration concurrently was doing with Columbia University, it was demanding of Columbia that it be a university again, and that it be open to different points of view. And so the Paul Weiss agreement is really, as I say in the piece, it's sleeves off the vest, which is to say they gave nothing other than just acknowledging who they're supposed to be, which is a high quality firm focused on legal talent coming from all directions of every race, color, and philosophical perspective. And so, look, I think it's a good roadmap for people generally, right? Politics and business don't have to be, working hand in glove. There's, focus on making widgets. It doesn't have to be political.
But, the Paul Weiss case and the Columbia case that you mentioned, right, are being sort of framed in the media as, oh, this is the Trump sort of authoritarian regime that is imposing its anti-free speech. They're not, tolerating diverse viewpoints on campus. They're squelching academic freedom, and they're doing the same. They're strong-arming these law firms into getting what they want. Is there something to that, Richard? Is this appropriate for the administration to be telling, irrespective, if you think Columbia has gone off the rails, is it appropriate for the administration to be, using the levers of money and power to be forcing organizations to do what they want? And does that set a bad precedent when, a Democrat comes in, as they obviously will, that this is going to be now the new normal?
Well, I think you have to recognize that this has been going on, this levering has been going on now for many years. And the levering has all been from the left. And it's with this ecosystem of activist groups, which, by the way, many of which were funded, indirectly or directly by USAID. So you had this government activist, kind of groups working again with some big law in the pro bono space, driving an agenda towards the left. And so there was no real countervailing organizations on the right pushing back against this. And so the Trump administration is serving in that role. It's levering back against the left wing, levering from the other direction. And so, for example, with Columbia, what you see is Columbia basically agreeing that, gosh, yeah, we should protect Jewish students. What they let happen was wildly inappropriate, right? And that they ought to have some balance in their scholarship. That's the whole point with having an open university system. And unfortunately, what we've seen is once the left gets in, they want to exclude all other points of view, and they want to just make this more monolithic. So the reality is that Trump, through these actions in many different directions, is trying to open up the elite culture again, open up elite culture to different perspectives, and to make it safe for people to be conservative and to reject some of the left-wing activism that's been going through and being levered into the businesses and the universities and so forth.
All right. We are going to leave it there. Richard Porter, contributor to RealClearPolitics. Again, go read his piece on RCP this morning. It's called what is it called? BigLaw Gets Back to Business. Thanks again, Richard. Always great to have you.
Thanks a lot.
All right. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more RealClearPolitics on SiriusXM.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined now by Peder Zane. He is an editor at RealClear Investigations. Peder, welcome back to the program.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So, Peder, there is an article on RCI today. It's kind of interesting because it's by Paul Sperry, and it's actually a takedown of a story that, if true, promised to be pretty explosive. The headline is "An Alleged Comey Honeypot Sexting Against Trump Smells Fishy." So tell us about the story. What's going on?
So Real Clear Investigations has spent a lot of time investigating Russiagate, the claim that Donald Trump had colluded with Vladimir Putin to steal the 2016 election. And recently, another paper had a story that said that a whistleblower complaint had been advanced to the government, claiming that James Comey had in 2015, so this would be a full year before anybody knew that the effort to target Trump had occurred, that in 2015, Comey had created an off-the-books operation involving a female FBI agent who was to infiltrate the Trump campaign to try to dig up dirt or to find out about wrongdoing, the suspected wrongdoing. So we read this story. We were like, this is explosive if this is true. And so we got Paul Sperry, who has done fantastic work for us on the past on Russiagate, to look into it. And what he found was that there appears to be almost no substance to this charge. That in fact, although it was portrayed as a whistleblower, it in fact is a letter that was written by an attorney who is also, we found, a disgruntled former FBI employee who claimed that other FBI employees had told him about this operation.
So basically, yeah, that was a key part of the story. This whistleblower, so-called, really is this guy in Connecticut. His name is Kurt Soisdak. I'm not sure I've got the pronunciation right. You might know. Sousdak. But who was Sousdak, and how did he get this information to the FBI?
Well, anybody can write a letter. So he used to work for the FBI. And he, as Paul goes into great detail, his career probably did not advance as far as he hoped it would. And it sounds like he had some medical issues that may have made it difficult for him to achieve certain things. But the picture that we get is of a disgruntled person who has previously filed other quote, whistleblower or accusatory charges against the FBI, none of which was known from the earlier reporting. And there's some suggestion that, he has done this before. And so what we started with was there were a couple of claims that we could verify. Oftentimes with these letters, you just sort of, you don't know who the whistleblower is. Who's the FBI employee that this person said that he was speaking to? But one of the things he did was he said that the New York Times had told the FBI that it had a photograph of the honeypots. There were two of them supposedly, and that if they were going to publish it, and that the FBI had warned them off, saying, if you publish their photos, they will be killed. So this is a verifiable fact. We went to the New York Times and we said, is this true? And they said, it is not. In addition, he said that the honeypot had approached George Papadopoulos in 2016. And we all know Papadopoulos was supposedly one of the galvanizing forces in the original Russiagate reporting. But in fact, Papadopoulos didn't join the campaign until 2016. So it was not only unlikely, but all but impossible that a honeypot would have approached George Papadopoulos then.
Yeah, so like a year before.
Yeah.
Right.
So in reporting the story, one of the things Sperry did was, what can I verify that we do know? What are verifiable facts? I mean, now we've got to say the story had a kernel of truth in that James Comey's FBI had in fact, and again, a lot of people, my wife included, don't like the term honeypot, I don't know, but had used female agents to try to suborn or extract information from George Papadopoulos and other Trump associates. So he had done that. Comey had also...
Yes. Yeah, just to back up, because that struck me, and that was an interesting point in the article there. There was a woman who called herself Azra Turk.
Yes.
And if she wasn't part of an FBI sting, and Papadopoulos has talked about her and said she had dirty blonde hair and very attractive, I guess. What was she and what was she doing?
We still don't know. We know that she introduced herself as an associate of Stefan Halper, who was a longtime asset of the United States government, who is an American who had taught for years in London, and that's where this meeting occurred. And by the way, I would recommend all your readers to Google Mark Hemingway's piece on Stefan Halper that he wrote for RealClear Investigations a couple of years ago. He's a fascinating. He is like it's not Zelig is overused, but he literally was involved in so many. You can connect him to Watergate tangentially. You can connect him to the stolen Jimmy Carter campaign book in 1980, Iran-Contra, and Russiagate. I mean,
wow.
It's a fascinating story. But there was plenty of reason to believe that Comey might have done this. So what we start with is this plausible? Yes, because Comey had used female agents. He had secretly taken notes of his meetings with Donald Trump and then gave them to a friend who leaked them to the press. He had, of course, if you remember, which is often forgotten, he was in the January 5th, 2017 Oval Office meeting with Obama and Susan Rice and Joe Biden, where the very next day he briefed Trump on the Steele dossier that was Hillary Clinton funded opposition research, which they knew at the time was probably not true. But he briefed Trump on it so that lo and behold, a few days later, CNN and BuzzFeed published this information. That was the news hook, Comey's meeting with Trump, and that really ignited Russiagate. And people forget that fact. They also forget, by the way, that John Brennan of the CIA told Obama in July of 2016 that he had pretty solid information that the Clinton campaign, worried about the 33,000 disappeared emails from her server, were going to blame her email problems on Donald Trump and Russia. That alone, when you think about Russiagate, that Brennan tells Obama in July, Clinton's cooking up a lie to protect herself. And all of that stuff still unfolded.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, given all of that, and given how most of our reporting has, revealed real malfeasance on the part of the FBI, the CIA, and the White House and whatnot concerning Russiagate, we dug in and we found that there was not much to this claim. And we had to run it, because we could have also just honestly looked at it and said, oh, there's nothing there. It doesn't seem to be real. But that would seem to be a disservice to readers too, to let lies fester about Comey, even though he's done lots wrong. He doesn't appear to have done this.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. And I'm talking to J. Peder Zane. He's an editor at RealClear Investigations. When you get a story like this that kind of takes the wind out of the sails of something that on the surface looks so juicy, what is your thinking about publishing it? Because you ran this story, which you ran on the front page or the top of the page at RC Investigations. RealClearPolitics picked it up as well. And yet it's a little bit of a sort of a letdown for the reader, I guess, because, it's Honeypot, it's sex, it's the FBI. It sounds like there could be a lot there. And, it turns out, I guess, where there's smoke, there's not always fire.
The allegations itself are so explosive, again, that Russiagate started a year before anybody else knew, or almost a year before, and involved people who might have engaged in such behavior, meant that once we found out what was going on, it was still news. In other words, we weren't running down some minor aspect, a real estate deal where there was no shenanigans. This would have completely changed the narrative if it were true. And not only did another publication first write about this, and not only is the whistleblower, the letter rather, at the House and the Senate, but Kash Patel, the FBI director, has cryptically responded to it in some way. I'll tell you a funny thing, though, is that the New York Times was one of our chief sources to raise questions about the letter in their denial that it had ever had a photograph and was told not to run it. But the Times itself sort of cryptically referred to this and said Kash Patel was correct to throw water on it, but they actually were referring to a 2016 event and not 2015. So if you actually read what the New York Times was talking about, they're completely misleading. And I think it's also interesting, and I don't want to like raise conspiracy theories here, but you think the Times would have been all over this when they're implicated in this story. And I don't know why they aren't, and maybe they're working on it, but we're glad. I tell you what, once we got their denial, we were like, we need to get this up, because we fully expected that they might run something, and we're in a competitive business, and Sperry was ready, locked and loaded and ready to go. And I'll say one last thing is that this man who filed this complaint, you know, I don't know what his situation is. You know, he clearly seems disgruntled, and nobody knows who he is. And so there's a little bit of like, should we run this story for a guy who may just be unhappy? But, you know, when you insert yourself into a story of this size and make such huge claims, even if it's pretty clear from the letter, there's like, it seems just made up. We had more of an obligation to set the record straight. But that was another issue we wrestled with, is should we be writing about this guy and the issues that he's had in the past.
Yeah. Well, fascinating stuff. Peder, thanks so much. We've been listening to J. Peder Zane. He's a writer at RealClear Investigations, editor there. You've been listening to RealClear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. That's our program for today. Hope you'll join us again tomorrow for more RealClear Politics. Have a great evening.